On April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was shot by a would-be assassin while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And at the time, most believed the shot had been fatal. However, it was revealed that he was actually suffocated in the hospital later that evening. Shortly after the news of King's assassination, riots would ensue across the country. Just 2 days after the King assassination, while the country was still being rocked by riots, it was alleged that 14 Black Panthers between 3 vehicles ambushed local Oakland police officers, which then led to a 90-minute shootout between police officers and the Black Panthers, who were armed with shotguns and M16s. The aftermath resulted in 2 police officers being wounded, 1 Black Panther being wounded, and 1 Black Panther being fatally shot, while the sole fatality was that of 17-year-old Black Panther Bobby Hutton. Bobby Hutton was the first member to join the Black Panther Party at 16 years old, and at the time, just 2 weeks shy of his 18th birthday, would become their first casualty. Although reports stated it was up to 14 men, 7 were arrested and charged. Among those were David Hilliard, who at the time was the National Chief of Staff and one of the highest-ranking Panthers, while Huey was behind bars at the time for involuntary manslaughter of Officer Fry. Other members arrested were Charles Bursey, the Captain of Education, Terry Cotton, Donald Langford, Warren Wells, Wendell Wade, and Black Panther Party Minister of Information, Eldridge Cleaver, who was wounded in the leg during the shootout. It will be this single event that the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover will ultimately declare the Black Panther Party as the greatest internal threat to national security, as well as lead to the decimation of the Black Panther Party leadership. Peace, y'all. This is your brother Jay Blak, and this is Agent, the series where we profile certain individuals along with their activities that clearly show agent-like tendencies and in most cases, outright agent actions. Tonight's episode, which is our inaugural episode, we will be discussing the activities and actions of the former Black Panther Party, the Minister of Information, Eldridge Cleaver, during his tenure in the Black Power movement.
Pro ain't dead. Don't think you screaming Black Power, putting in work for the people and not getting watched. Shit, it's agents in here right now. You might not know who it is, but we gon' speak to them anyway. Follow my lead. Yeah. Somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI. Yeah, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI. Yo, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Teaching black people. Just say hi, FBI. Yeah, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. You don't think they got bye, FBI. Yeah, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI. Shit, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Click, clack, bye-bye, FBI.
Let's define the word agent. Agent. A person who acts on behalf of another person or group, or a person or thing that takes an active role or produces a specified effect. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be law enforcement. You don't have to necessarily be working for someone else. It could be on your own behalf. It says a person or thing that takes an active role. So it doesn't even have to be an actual person, right? And then we got different type of agents. You got the regular agents, you got double agents, you got double, triple agents. You get the point. Eldridge Cleaver was born August 31st, 1935 in Wabasaka, Arkansas. While still young, his parents, Leroy and Thelma Cleaver, would move him and his 4 siblings to Los Angeles. As a youth, he was constantly in trouble with the law, even spending time in juvenile detention as a teenager. By the time he was 18, he was arrested for felony marijuana and convicted and sentenced to Soledad prison. And just 5 years later, at 23, he was convicted for rape and assault with intent to murder, where he would be sentenced to 2 to 14 years in Folsom State Prison. While in prison, Cleaver became somewhat politicized, obtaining a copy of the Communist Manifesto, as well as other Marxist literature. He would soon then join the Nation of Islam, convert to a Muslim. But by 1963, he would become heavily dissatisfied and leave the religious organization. Shortly after, he would then write to San Francisco civil liberties attorney Beverly Axelrod for help handling his case and to try to secure parole. During Axelrod's prison visit, she began collecting Cleaver's essays and writings. She then handed them over to an associate and publisher of the left-wing Ramparts magazine, Edward Michael Keaton. By June 1966, Eldridge Cleaver's essays began to be published in Ramparts magazine, and by December of that year, Eldridge was granted parole with the help of his new friend, Edward Michael Keaton Sr. And upon his release, immediately joined the Rampart staff at San Francisco office, during which time the managing editor of Ramparts magazine was former FBI agent turned FBI critic William Turner. Now, for those who are not familiar with Ramparts magazine, it was a magazine that was established in 1962 by Edward Michael Keaton Sr., closely associated with the New Left. It was initially established as a form to showcase the creative writer for the mature American Catholic, with the magazine intended to publish fiction, poetry, art, criticism, and essays of distinction reflecting those positive principles of the Hellenic Christian tradition. But by the late 60s, it had become a highly radicalized publication, producing articles related to opposition against the Vietnam War, the Kennedy assassination, as well as printing the diary of Che Guevara, and later publishing the prison diaries of Eldridge Cleaver into the semi-autobiographical book Soul on Ice. It was at a political meeting in 1967 in San Francisco, California. Eldridge Cleaver would have his first run-in with the Black Panther Party while they were doing the security detail for Betty Shabazz, the widow of the late and great Malcolm X. By his own admission, he was captivated by the sight of fully armed Black Panthers in black leather jackets with black berets holding down Sister Betty Shabazz. Around the same time, Cleaver, along with Ed Bullins and a few others, would establish the cultural and political center in San Francisco, the Black House, which Huey Newton and Bobby Seale were often used for Black Panther Party meetings. These meetings would tighten the ties between Eldridge Cleaver and the Black Panther Party. Cleaver, who held somewhat of prestige as a writer, became a desirable ally for the Panthers. That same year, in 1967, while speaking at a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, he would meet one of the conference organizers by the name of Kathleen Neal. The two would immediately begin a romantic relationship. Kathleen Neal was born May 13, 1945. Her mother, Pearl Jewett Neal, held a master's degree in mathematics, and her father, Ernest Eugene Neal, was a sociology professor and later the director of the Rural Life Council of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, where he moved the family into a segregated middle-class community. Later, her father would be selected to join the United States Foreign Service, whose officers are appointed by the president. So her father had to be appointed by the President of the United States for his position. Check. All right now. As a state foreign service officer, one of the major duties is to carry out the foreign policy of the United States while also abiding United States citizens abroad. The position caused him to move his family overseas, living in such countries as India, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the Philippines. So this was an international chick at a young age. Spending time in India exposed Kathleen to different beliefs, including socialism, communism, and nationalism. The family returned to the United States after her brother had died from leukemia. Back in the States, she attended George School, a boarding school not far from Philadelphia, where in 1963 she graduated with honors, then going on to Oberlin University. In 1966, she transferred to the all-women's Barnard College. She left college for a secretarial job with the New York office of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, after a friend from childhood, Sammy Young, had been murdered by white supremacists. So basically, her father was a foreign affairs government op, whose position was handpicked by the United States president. She was raised between segregated communities, overseas, and boarding school, went to college, then dropped out to join the Black Power struggle after her friend was murdered by white supremacists. And now she's hooking up with a convicted rapist. Let's continue. Shortly after meeting Eldridge Cleaver, Kathleen joined the Black Panther Party, which happened to be just a few weeks after Huey was arrested for the murder of Officer John Fry, which kicked off the Free Huey movement, which both Eldridge and Kathleen were heavily involved in. With Huey locked up, Eldridge's influence began to increase. As the editor of the Black Panther Party, they sold 250,000 papers under Eldridge's watch. Basically, while this guy's in jail for rape and attempted murder, he's able to appeal to a civil rights attorney, Beverly Axelrod, who then introduces him to the founder and the publisher of Rampart magazine, Edward Michael Keaton Sr., who then Sr. is able to help Cleaver obtain parole and then hire him as a writer for his magazine, as well as getting his first book published. And all this was a year after he got out of jail, within a year. Not to mention becoming the Minister of Information with the Black Panther Party. How does that sound to you? All this after being released from prison within a year, which now brings us to that fateful night in April of 1968, when Cleaver led at least a dozen Black Panthers a suicide ambush of the Oakland police, which led to a 90-minute shootout between the police and the Black Panthers. According to reports by Cleaver, after the ambush, they fled into a home of two elderly women. After being held up in the home, police then shot tear gas into the house, prompting Cleaver to surrender, but not before stripping down naked, rationalizing that the police would not shoot him if they see he's clearly unarmed. Cleaver claims he advised Bobby Hutton to do the same. He stated Hutton didn't want to take off his pants and only took off his shirt, and while surrendering with his hands up, was shot 12 times by police officers, where he was killed on the scene. Eldridge was taken into custody and charged with attempted murder of police officers and aggravated assault. Cleaver, who was still on parole, was given no bail, sent back to prison with his parole immediately revoked. However, in a strange turn of events, Judge Raymond Sherwin of the Solano County Superior Court later ordered his release, ruling that the parole revocation was an unconstitutional attempt to silence Cleaver for his undue eloquence in pursuing political goals rather than for failing personal rehabilitation. Cleaver was then granted a $50,000 bail for attempted murder on a police officer and was shortly bailed out. But in November of '68, after a higher court overturned Judge Sherwin's ruling and ordered him back to prison, Cleaver jumped bail, fled the country to avoid reincarceration. Just 3 days before his scheduled surrender, Cleaver traveled to Montreal. From Montreal, he flew to Havana, where in Cuba he was to be a guest of Fidel Castro under political asylum, where he was told he would receive military training while in Cuba. But Castro, who didn't trust Cleaver, was informed by his advisors that the CIA had infiltrated the party, which then prompted him to ship Cleaver to Algiers. In July of 1969, his wife Kathleen would also arrive in Algiers to accompany him. He would remain in Algiers from 1969 to 1972, during which time Cleaver transformed the city into an international hub for the Black Panther Party. And in Algeria, he established the international wing of the Black Panther Party with help from his Jewish translator, journalist, connect, Elaine McDuffie, who was also instrumental in arranging his arrival and safekeeping in Algiers. So he was pretty much making out better than he was in the United States at this point. Cleaver, who was advocating for an armed revolution and overthrow of the United States government, while building alliances with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, the Viet Cong, as well as the North Korean government. In 1969, he was a key figure at the Pan-African Cultural Festival in Algiers, with the Panthers opening an African-American Senate to showcase their artwork and ideology to activate across the globe. From Algiers, he would visit twice North Korea in '69 and in 1970, and then in China in 1970 as part of the U.S. People's Anti-Imperialist Delegation, along with another prominent party member, Elaine Brown. So he was an international player for sure. He was meeting with all types of government officials, going from this country, bouncing to this country, with all type of funding and finance. And just to think, not even a full 5 years prior, this man was in prison for rape and attempted murder. And it's not like he was some type of political or black power revolutionary figure before he went into jail. The man went into jail a regular criminal, regular low-life rapist. But let's continue. In 1971, tensions between Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton, who recently had his manslaughter conviction overturned and was now free from prison, began to rise, with Huey Newton wanting to focus on social and survival programs, and Eldridge Cleaver felt the need to take on armed struggle. Eventually, the tensions would come to a head, and on February 26, 1971, during a live broadcast of KGO-TV's AM show in San Francisco, while Huey Newton was in the studio for an interview intended to show the party's unity, Eldridge Cleaver called in via long-distance telephone hookup from Algiers. But instead of showing unity, Cleaver used the moment to criticize the leadership of the Black Panther Party, demanding for the immediate expulsion of David Hilliard, as well as the reinstatement of the recently expelled Panther 21 out of New York, and also that Huey Newton had become too much of a reformist.
I just want to comment on the expulsion of the New York 21, because it looks to us as though, as a result of the actions taken by David Hilliard over a long period of time, the party has fallen apart this season.
Okay, fine. Good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
After the program, Huey, who was fuming and embarrassed, immediately called back to the program.
Mr. Cleaver?
Yeah.
Chisula?
Hey, what's happening?
Yeah, you got the bombshell this morning. Well, very embarrassing for me. So, I'm warning you now, or notifying you, that the intercommunal section, you hear?
Yeah?
after Huey announced the expulsion of the international chapter, which was ran by Eldridge Cleaver.
To be disciplined. And my recommendation is to discipline Eldridge Cleaver, not for the criticism itself, but the way in which it was presented.
This split became a permanent splinter amongst the Black Panther Party. Those who sided with Huey focused more on survival programs like the Free Breakfast Program, and those who sided with Cleaver were more focused on armed struggle to gain liberation. And although he seemed to have a strong, solid support system with the Algerian government, by 1972, Cleaver had all but outgrown his welcome. After several planes had been flown to Algeria with hundreds of thousands of dollars in ransom money, Cleaver demanded the Algerian government hand over the money to him to fund the Black Revolution. With the Algerian government already not pleased by the way they felt Cleaver had been carrying on with his radical and extreme high-profile antics, adding the fact that the U.S. and Algerian relations were warming, with Algeria negotiating a huge natural gas deal with the United States and feeling like their relationship with the Black Panther Party could possibly ruin the deal. But ultimately, it was Cleaver's demands for the ransom money becoming the last straw. The Algerian government closed down the Panther headquarters and placed Cleaver and his cohorts under house arrest. And in 1972, feeling unsafe in Algiers, Cleaver would then flee to France. While in France, Eldridge Cleaver did an about-face, becoming a born-again Christian and denouncing what he called his violent past. After 3 years in France and being homesick, as he put it, he felt it was time to come home and that the climate would be just right for him to face his charges. So in 1975, Eldridge Cleaver returned to the United States to face his charges of aggravated assault and attempted murder on the police after being on the run, a fugitive, for 7 years. He was on the run for 7 years, and now he returns to turn himself in. Out on bail, his court cases dragged on for 3 years. And in 1978, after being a fugitive from the law for over 7 years on the run and advocating for the overthrow of the U.S. government, he pled guilty to the lesser charge of assault and was given 1,200 hours of community service. That's right, community service for attempted murder of police officers. Duke had a whole 90-minute shootout with the police, resulting in 2 officers getting wounded, 1 man dead, and this dude gets community service. Not to mention that the other Panthers involved all was received between 10 to 15 years, with the exception of David Hilliard, who I believe was out within 4 to 6 years. But okay, by the early 80s, Cleaver, who now was even disillusioned with the evangelist church, had become a Unitarian Christian. Then he converted to Catholicism for a brief minute, which then he went on to start his own revivalist movement called the Cleaver Crusades, which was a synthesis hybrid of Christianity and Islam that he dubbed Chrislam, with an auxiliary branch called the Guardians of the Sperm. Yeah, this dude was a weirdo for real. Only by the end of 1983 to be baptized a Mormon of the Church of Latter-day Saints, at which time he became a full conservative Republican, appearing in Republican events, even speaking at the California Republican State Central Committee. He backed Ronald Reagan for his 1980 election run, and then really got behind him in 1984 election. Yup, Ronald Reagan, the same Ronald Reagan that was the governor of California. The same Ronald Reagan that at one time, Eldridge Cleaver on a college campus urged the whole crowd to follow him in the chant of "Fuck Ronald Reagan." He even tried his hand in a couple of elections, and in 1984 he ran for the Berkeley City Council and in 86 for the Republican primary Senate candidacy, losing both bids. He even started a fashion line called the Cleavers, which had some really strange crotch pockets. It was, I guess, to let your man muscle breathe a little bit. I don't know what that shit was about. And by the mid-'80s, he also became a full-time crackhead. And in 1987, he and his wife, Kathleen, of 20 years, divorced. So she was with all that flip-flop foolery he was on. I mean, this dude was a dolphin. I mean, if I ever seen a dolphin, this dude was a dolphin. In 1988, he was then charged with burglary and crack possession and sentenced to probation, which is interesting because to have a criminal record as long as he does and with the type of things he has on it to only get, never mind, let's just continue. Later that year, he was jailed briefly for testing positive for cocaine while on probation, but it was only briefly because he got it like that. In 1990, he volunteered himself into a drug rehab program for crack cocaine addiction. He was arrested again in 1992 in Oakland and again in 94 in Berkeley, both for crack possession, which would be his final run-in with the law. 3 years later, after suffering from some unknown illness his family did not want disclosed, Eldridge Cleaver passed away. So let's look at the big picture and focus on the time period from when he came home from prison to his return from exile to the United States of America and subsequent conviction and sentencing. So here he is in jail, a convicted rapist doing his time, and he forges a relationship with Beverly Axelrod, the civil rights attorney, who then introduces him to Edward Michael Keaton Sr., the publisher for Ramparts magazine, who helps secure his release and immediately gives him a job on his writing staff, as well as publishing his first book, Soul on Ice, which in turn helped him parlay a relationship with the Black Panther Party, and being an established publisher made him a valuable asset, allowing him to immediately assume a position among leadership within the ranks, during which time the leader had been incarcerated. So Huey in jail right now. Huey goes to jail shortly after that for the murder of Fry. So now Huey in jail, and Eldridge's influence is starting to grow, which ultimately enabled him to lead an ambush against the police on April 6, 1968, with 2 police officers being injured, along with himself and 17-year-old Bobby Hutton murdered. In the immediate aftermath, he's arrested. His parole is revoked, but in an odd turn of events, his parole was reinstated. He was allowed to be bailed out, giving him the opportunity to flee to Montreal, Canada. From Canada, catch a flight into Cuba. From Cuba, he stayed there for a year until Castro grew weary of his presence, forcing him to have to relocate to Algeria, Africa, where he was then able to establish an international base out of the city of Algiers, where he was located at. Who is giving him all these funds? In his second book, Soul on Fire, he admitted to getting a stipend from Viet Cong as well as North Korea and the full support of the Algerian government. But by 1972, that support from the Algerian government had been withdrawn, and again, he was forced to flee, this time to France. Now the question begins, who is he actually working for? Is it impossible to believe that the government will recruit criminals from prison to infiltrate not only the Black Power movement, but to also spy on foreign governments with communist regimes? To suggest that Cleaver was some type of agent or even agent provocateur who was sent to create dissension amongst the ranks of the Black Panther Party almost seems to be a far-gone conclusion at this point. But was that the complete extent of it? Is it possible Cleaver could have been working as a U.S. spy, collecting intelligence on foreign communist governments? From criminal and predator, Black Muslim, the published writer, Black revolutionary, fugitive, international mascot, born-again Christian, conservative Republican, to a damn Mormon, and finally a crackhead, Eldridge Cleaver is a man who lived his life in many phases and stages. I am your brother, the pragmatic Che Blak. And if you like this program, please like, subscribe, And look out for the second installment, which will be dropping very soon. Peace and salute to all those champions of truth.
Follow my lead. Yeah. Somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI.